Well, I think I'm ready. I mean, in theory, I'm ready, right? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Nutmeg Tavern. No. Welcome, everyone, to the Nutmeg Tavern. I'm your host, John Townsend, and today we're talking about fun 18th century stuff like what do soldiers really eat during the American Revolution, and how do they eat it, and how do they cook it, and how much did they really get, and did they all starve to death? And yes, pretty much, yes, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. If the thumbnail, and you're going to say, John, your hat's on crooked, right? Because it's supposed to... wait a minute. It's like, yeah, it's pretty much like that. So, anyway, I'll straighten it up because it's going to drive me crazy. What was I going to say? Anyway, today's episode, we're talking about soldier rations in the 18th century and specifically in the Revolutionary War. I've got lots and lots of little reading clips, things, so that will help us kind of paint the picture. We talked about it on the channel today, but we're going super in-depth today. So one of the reasons why we can go super in-depth today is because I've been studying for the video that's going to come out on Sunday. That is actually going to be a short version of what we're going to be talking about today, because today we're going to get into the weeds of that kind of content. But you have to watch Sunday's video anyway, because it's got lots of pretty pictures and stuff like that. I'm joined by other folks on the other side of the time vortex to help me do the technical parts of this, because as I reside here in the 18th century, I can't access all this fun stuff that you live with in the modern world, wherever you're at. But Lauren is in the chat.
Hi.
And Ivy is on the console.
Hi, everyone.
And there they are. Soldiers in the 18th century and I will say this as the 18th century, because rations and soldier food, it isn't really changing all that much from, say, 1750 all the way up to War of 1812, and really doesn't change all that much even in the Civil War. I mean, there's some changes, but not massive quantities. Things like coffee get a lot more popular, and so that's more of a rigid ration maybe in the Civil War, and their hardtack / ship's biscuit is a slightly different shape. But pretty much, whether you're in the French Indian War or War of 1812, that whole time period, the rations are going to be very, very similar. And it was an amazingly difficult project for the Continental Army to feed their troops. They probably did a better job than I would imagine they were able to with the resources they had available to them, the system that they had to come up with, sort of, it's like build an army now and figure out how to feed it, and figure out how to get arms for it and uniforms, and come up with everything. Just go guys. Right? That's really hard to do, and the food was a difficulty from the get-go, and they had some learning to do. Things get better during the war, as they kind of hone their skills, but not a lot better. It seems like what they intended to do early on, they kind of had to pull back on this is realistic. So you'll see over the time frame of the war, different times when they will talk about the rations, saying this is what the ration is, and they'll keep modifying that, because they know that some things that they put in the ration early on, just they can't do it. We can't do it, right? So one of the most interesting things, before I get any deeper, do we need to touch base on anything?
Yes, there's a super chat here from Mandatory Carry. I'm going to be traveling for work, but thank you, and I'll try to catch a rerun tonight.
Very good.
And then we kind of cleaned up our thumbnail. I mean, some people might be coming in thinking we're talking about barrels today.
Yeah, so I don't know what was up with YouTube. I mean, I scheduled the live stream this morning, and I created the thumbnail. It showed up in where it was supposed to. It looked right, and yet, YouTube continued to show people last week's thumbnail. I don't know what to tell you.
Us. So thanks for telling us. And then somebody was wondering if you'd ever been to George Rogers Clark National Historic Site in Vincennes.
Yes.
Did you enjoy it?
Many times.
They were thinking about stopping by there on their way through.
I haven't been there in many years, but it's the memorial itself is a very interesting building and has some great acoustics to it, and it's an interesting site. I don't know if it has been updated since I was there, so I can't speak to its current situation.
Very nice. Okay.
Poor guy eating hardtack right now. Hope your teeth, get through it.
Probably have some nice wine to dip it in.
Yeah, exactly. So what is well, first off, credit where credit is due. There's really no reason for me to do a whole bunch of primary document research when it's already been done. So all of this material is basically, I'm just skimming out of a paper done by John Rees. He does a ton of research for soldiers during the American Revolution, whether it's food or equipment or uniforms. You can find a ton of stuff he's written for the past 15, 20 years, I don't know, a long time. And he does very, very specific and detailed research. He finds wonderful primary documentation, and I can't speak enough about his research, and so I just wanted to give that straight up front. I didn't have to do the digging because he already did all the work for me. So what is a ration really like? At least what was it supposed to be? So generically throughout this, say, 6-year war time frame, there's a meat portion and there's a bread portion. And the meat portion was to be a pound of meat, specifically beef, or a pound of fish, usually as a dried fish, or 3/4 of a pound of pork. The beef might come in fresh or in salted. The fish, as far as I know, always came salted, and then pork might be fresh, but probably more likely a salted version. Why there's a discrepancy between a little less of the pork than beef, I don't know. Maybe they thought it was less nutritious or more nutritious. I really can't speak to that necessarily. Or maybe it just cost more. So I'm not sure what to say about that. And there are specific situations where they might substitute in some other meat like sheep. So there's at least one specific reading here I've got where the person talks about going to collect the rations, and they go to the butchering area, and that day there was no beef to butcher, and so they were butchering a bunch of sheep. And very interesting. So you don't necessarily see that written out very often, but obviously in that particular situation, it's like, well, we're going to issue what we've got, bring those sheep in. And that sort of speaks to, I don't have any readings right here, but that speaks to some of the difficulty the Army had in supplying. So today, when the Army wants to supply food, they have this giant 250-year tradition of feeding the Army, and they know exactly what it takes, right? So food has to be prepared. So like in the circumstance with MREs, you have all these suppliers that they tell them, well, the meal's got to be packaged like this, and it's got to have this in it, and it has this. So they know exactly what's in every single meal. Every single one is all sealed up. They know how long it's going to last, etc., etc. But what if you said, oh, I've got to deliver, 1,000 meals to these soldiers, and you are doing it with fresh meat? I mean, what? How were you going to, in the 18th century, deliver up all this fresh meat? Once meat in the 18th century is butchered, it's got to be delivered within a very, very particular amount of time, or else it's going to go bad. They don't have refrigeration. And just to get the meat before it's fresh, right? You're driving a bunch of cows to the camp, and then they're butchering them there in a spot, and just doing that. So if you have the cattle any length of time, they need to have food to eat. They need to have fodder. Again, a difficulty. So you have trouble transporting the live meat, as it were. They had troubles with getting the herds of cattle across rivers. So it's like, okay, we're going to get this giant herd of cattle. We got to take it 50 miles. There's a river. And there was some circumstance, somebody was talking about the difficulty they had. They had to wait for the ferries to take the cattle across. And apparently the ferry drivers were just like, whatever. They were having fun, like drowning the cows. Like, well, some fell overboard. Ha ha ha. Real trouble. Just getting stupid cows to the camp so that they could butcher them and then offer up the meat. So it's easier, and they talked about this even in this circumstance. Like, it would be easier if we had salt provisions. If they butchered them someplace else. They put all this with salt and they put it in a keg, and and then we don't have to worry about it going bad. It's easier to distribute. It's already in particular size chunks, like that. And that was specifically asked for in situations where they were going to go on a march. It's like, okay, we need to issue these men 4 days rations because we're going to go on this march and have a battle or not, whatever. So many times they went on a march and they didn't go anywhere. Nothing happened. But they needed food for multiple days. And if you issue 4 days worth of fresh meat to the soldiers, what are we supposed to do? Like, cook it and hope it doesn't go bad in our kettles? It's going to go bad if it's fresh. Well, so they would specifically hope that they could issue salt rations out, which wouldn't go bad immediately. Same thing true for bread. It's much better to issue out ship's biscuit instead of fresh bread. But so, the meat had this particular, problem with it. If you're going to get it fresh, if I was a soldier, I'm sure it would be much easier to deal with a fresh provision right away versus a salt, because then you have to soak it, you get to get the salt out of it, and then so lots and lots of trouble with that. But I went on a rabbit trail that just went forever. Anyway, so there's the meat provision, and then there's the bread provision, and the bread is a pound of bread per day per man. That issued in fresh bread form, in ship's biscuit form, or kind of third, and seemed to happen awful lot. Flour was substituted for that, or possibly even cornmeal if they didn't have any flour at all. It seemed like a lot of times they're getting a flour ration instead of a bread ration. The army for a while thought, I know what we can do. We can have our own army bakers bake the bread. But it didn't really seem to work out, and so they kind of went to the contractor, bake us a whole bunch of bread. But again, fresh bread is difficult. So even if you've got a contractor making up a bunch of bread, you have to transport it. You have to figure out, you got to distribute it before it goes bad in a fresh bread situation. And so again, difficulties. It's much easier to issue out ship's biscuit, which will stay good for months, and is in a more condensed form, or even flour, because you can just get it into barrels and just like, well, there you go, have good luck with that. Make your own bread, right? Which you can do, but more than likely the soldiers either created the little fire cakes, or they might do dumplings or something like that, or possibly take the bread into town and have someone bake it into bread for them. Take the flour into town and bring it. Other parts of the ration were And the amounts vary, but you might be issued a quart of beer a day or cider as a substitute for that. And if those weren't available, there was even a substitution of something like a small quantity of whiskey or rum to make. Did they issue it like the Navy and turn it into grog? I don't know. I don't have a specific answer to that. And it seemed like that's one of the things that disappears later on. You don't see that referenced as often, although sometimes. Also, there were some rations that were per week just because it was a smaller quantity and it was easier to enumerate that. But 3 pints of peas, beans, or other vegetables per man per week, a half a pint of rice or a pint of cornmeal, and sometimes they even mentioned the idea of a butter ration or a milk ration. Again, as far as I know, not issued very often. Even if it was called for, it wasn't issued very often. Now, that isn't to say it didn't happen. And like there's a circumstance here where there's documentation for New Jersey troops in 1780 receiving from the state stores, so from New Jersey stores, quantities of rum and sugar and coffee, it says in substantial quantities, and small amounts of chocolate, tea, pepper, and vinegar. And vinegar was another one of those, like rice. They were expected to have a certain amount of vinegar. And I don't know if many of us think about a vinegar ration. You think about a vinegar ration?
It'd be helpful. I feel like it would help a lot of vegetables, or some of the foraging stuff you got, to just add a little bit of flavor, like pepper.
There's reference here specifically with vinegar and sick people, right? Like they needed it, like they thought it was good for sick people.
Probably is.
So there's that. There are also, and here we do have, obviously sitting around here, we have bread. Now, I made these as for the video. These were like a 1 pound little loaves, nice and dense. It's probably that they made loaves for the squad level. So things were issued out to squads of 6 men. And so it's likely that they had these like 6 pound loaves. I don't know, maybe. So that was like, in the 18th century, they had large loaves of bread. So I can imagine them being, it's like, well, here's, divide that up, guys. Here's your six pounds of bread. Ship's biscuit came in this kind of form. And depending on, we don't have any true, documentation on exactly how big ship's biscuits were in the time period. There is at least one extant example from the 1780s of a ship's biscuit. Maybe 8 of these to the pound. You could probably make them as big as 6 to the pound. And there are references to maybe 3 per pound, but that's a big.
Maybe in the right weather, when it was a drying weather.
Right. So I don't think they're very helpful if they're too much bigger than this. So I would say 6 to the pound. Joseph Plum Martin talks about ship's biscuit multiple times in his memoirs. He mentions a time when he thought that the ship's biscuits were made out of quenelle and peas meal. And I was always confused by quenelle. He does have reference here in this to quenelle being a very, very, it's like the worst of the flours. In fact, it's like you take out the good stuff. It's like you've already taken out the bran, but the worst of the flour, after you take out the bran, you let me sift out the good stuff, and quenelle would be like the common flour, right? And he says they were just hard as rock, just impossible. And we don't have a lot of references. He talks about eating them by just gnawing on them.
Oh, That would take quite some time.
We soak them, talk about soaking them. Again, there's just not a lot of, particular references to how they would deal with it. And you can easily break these up and just throw them in the stew, and they do a great thing. They do a little bit of thickening, but they turn into this, they're like little chunks of meat when they're in there. They stay together, and I think ship's biscuit are really good, and a lot of people sometimes really come to prefer ship's biscuit over regular bread if you know what you're doing with it. So there's a funny, I don't know if I can find it. It's in here someplace. I wanted to talk about that butter ration for a second. Let me see where I find it. Oh, here we go. I found it. So this is like one of the official missives from one officer to another. The Commissioner General committed an error when making out the rations list, for he was then serving out, and continued to do so, 6 ounces per man per week of butter, though it is not included in the list approved by Congress. I do not think it would be expedient to stop there too, as everything that would have a tendency to give the soldiery room for complaints must be avoided. So there it is. It's like, wait a minute. Congress didn't say butter. You're issuing out butter. Forget it. They're already getting butter. They're
not going to put up with no butter.
If we stop the butter now, we probably get a butter riot or something, right? But I can just see some officer, wait a minute, you're giving out things we told them.
No butter.
We wouldn't give them.
Okay, so you want to pause for a second?
Yeah.
Some questions?
I'll take a breath.
Why not? Okay, so have you run across any instances where you saw British soldiers talking about the foods and kind of the new foods when they came over here during this time period?
The only one that pops into my head is the reference in Joseph Blum Martin's memoir, when he is very close to being captured. He's got like a knapsack on his back, and the bayonet or something strikes the bag, and cornmeal pours out, because that's all he had for a ration. And the soldiers are making fun of the idea that the American soldiers are having to resort to eating cornmeal, because corn and cornmeal for a British soldier is animal food. It isn't something that humans would eat. But that's these things are specifically for American soldiers. There was a couple of references, but I don't have anything other than that.
And one of the other questions was related to that as well. They were wondering, did rations vary much between American and British troops?
Generally, it's going to be the same quantities, the same sort of idea. The meat, the bread ration, the liquid portion, whatever is that. And they're much more likely to get those rations, being that they have a much more substantial, even though they're thousands of miles away from home base, right? They're much more likely to have the infrastructure to make sure that
because
those men are going to get...
Because their supply chains are already established.
Right, their supply chains are already, in place, and they're able to deliver those things.
Were soldiers, would they be carrying around various amounts of unfinished rations? So, like, would they, if they needed to move, would they still have rations? I kind of got the impression they were never getting enough food, so they would have eaten everything. But did you? It's
the evidence is here and there on that. But so the soldiers might, so they had a haversack. So there's a haversack here on the wall. They had a haversack. That's haver, meaning to hunger, might mean oats, or it means food bag, basically. So they sometimes were issued food bags, and that was for carrying the food specifically. But there are other references where they talk about putting food in their knapsacks. The problem is, now think about this, bread ration's no big deal. You put a bread in a bag. I can deal with that. what do you do with your meat portion? Maybe it's been turned into a stew. Do you cook it first? If you do, you're not putting it in a bag. It's not like you got a Ziploc bag in your thing, you know. It's like, that isn't going to work. So that kind of a part of your ration has to stay in a container that works with. And now what they would do is they would have their cooking kettle. It looks like a 2-gallon paint can is what it looks like, right? It's just a bucket. It's just a bucket. That's all it is. That's what they're cooking in, and that's their only real. The vast majority of cooking implements they've got are just these little. We would call them tin, but they're tin-plated iron, or just untin-plated iron, just iron. So they would rust. They would be nasty. They would go to bad. They were thin metal, and they would use that to carry their food in. So now there were specific times. You're going on a march for 4 days. They would issue 4 days worth of food. They would say, cook all that food, keep it in the bucket, and serve it out as your, even that, can you imagine? Six men, couple of, you're gonna divide this into 2 meals, what? And you've got 4 days worth. You've got this basically 2-gallon bucket that's full of food. Somebody's got to carry it. It's got all this food in it. Now, Joseph Lamartin in his memoir talks about marching, and he's marching with a bucket. They're marching. One of the persons has got the bucket. It's got some food in it, and they stop for a minute, and whoever's carrying it is tired of carrying it, and he says, he tries to get one of the other squad to carry it, and nobody would carry it. So he just leaves it on the ground, and they march off. And so the bucket gets picked up by somebody, further back in the line. They eat up everything that's in the bucket, and then pass the empty bucket back up to there you go, guys. There you go. You can have your nice, not so heavy bucket.
At least they got their bucket back.
Yeah, they got their bucket back, right?
It was like the tax for getting their bucket back.
So yeah, on the march, that's what I got for you there.
So you had talked a little bit. The New Jersey people got a little bit of sugar. Was there anything sweet? And I think when you were talking about the spruce beer, they sometimes would get some molasses. They got
molasses, so they would get. I can't remember exactly what the amount was. But so much molasses, and it was specifically meant to create spruce beer, or the equivalent thereof. So you could just make a molasses beer of it. All you need to really do is kind of like mead. You mix up that molasses with water, and you wait, and it goes bad, and turns into it goes bad and turns into a beer-like gick. Right? So that's what's going on there. It's like you're not issued any yeast. So, it's just got to pick up whatever's in the air, and off she goes. And, you might survive.
It could happen. So this person was asking a question about rice. And so they were saying, were they eating native wild rice? Or because we think of the rice as coming from Asia, but was that where it was coming from in the time period?
No, in the time period, it's coming from the Carolinas. Specifically, the Carolinas were a massive rice region, specifically South Carolina, during the 18th century. Now, it was a failed thing. They wanted to do that very, very early on in the 17th century. They failed with it, and it wasn't until they brought in enslaved Africans from a particular rice region that knew how to cultivate it, that they were successful in cultivating rice in the Carolinas.
Because rice it needs someone who knows what they're doing.
And in the 18th century, even in some of the cookbooks, it's called Carolina rice. It's like more rice was coming out of South Carolina, or the Carolinas, than any place else that was going to Europe in the time period. And there were other references too, where some of the soldiers were like, what is this rice stuff, and what are we supposed to do with it? Now remember, you got a bunch of 17, 18, 19-year-olds, right? Can you imagine? Who's going to cook? What it's going to be like?
They'll figure it out as they go along.
Yikes.
Okay, so I have some super chats here. This is from Solaris, the long hauler rail fan, and they're wondering, did they have wax paper in this timeline?
They had waxed other things, like waxed fabrics. And I imagine they did like waxed cloth bags so that you could kind of use them to keep stuff from getting wet / keeping wet things. I don't know. I don't have a great quantity of documentation on that. And I haven't seen anything referenced as wax paper, but there may indeed be something like that. There's so many tiny little things that we could research that would be interesting, but I don't have any
we'll keep our eyes out for it
exactly.
Now. And you never, sometimes that happens.
Yeah,
you'll
like 2 years from now,
yes.
It's like, oh, look at that,
like,
there's a giant book on wax paper, you know? But I don't have it up here in my head right now.
Always fun to find. Okay, so here's a super chat from Speed and Style. Tony, was there a coffee ration?
No, but apparently, you know, there are all these auxiliary rations that will happen. So, I mean, even though they were supposed to get this and this, occasionally, you know, they get something else. When something else is available, maybe it's donated, maybe they just get a, you know, Army gets a deal and they say, you know, we're going to be nice to some soldiers. They're going to accidentally get this ration. Maybe even specific, like this one that I referenced was New Jersey. So it could be that, you know, Congress set this ration aside, and then the state specifically said, you know what, we love our soldiers so much that we're going to issue this state ration out. And these are the rations specifically for the Continental Army. We don't even, you know, haven't even gotten into and I don't have the details for what's happening with militias and other specific state things.
Okay, so here is okay, I'm going to actually swap these around because you're going to go off on a rabbit trail on this one. So this one's from Ashley LeCount. Tomorrow is my 40th birthday. It's nice to celebrate in the tavern with you all today.
Woo-hoo!
Happy birthday.
I'm glad I hope you have a wonderful birthday.
And then this one is from Eric F. How effective were foraging and hunting for the Army? Would the soldiers have been given instruction on what things were safe to eat?
I've got just the reading for you. Hold on. Can I find him? You guys are making me do this out of order. Oh yeah, here we go. This is like the only quote that I read in the video. So this is good. This is George Washington, June of 1777, I believe. General George Washington authorized the foraging of wild vegetables at Middlebrook, New Jersey. There is plenty of common and French sorrel, lamb's quarters, and watercresses growing about the camp. The general recommends to the soldiers the constant use of them, as they make an agreeable salad and have a most salutary effect. The regimental officer of the day to send to gather them every morning and have them distributed among the men. So there is the idea of foraging. Washington, who is a farmer kind of person who knows things, things growing in the field, sees lamb's quarters, which is a weed, sorrel, which I found some growing in my driveway. And watercresses, I have no idea. I don't know that I've ever run into watercress, but he sees these plants and says, he could see something like stinging nettles, right, in the right time of year. Those are good to eat. You can survive on those. Make those soldiers eat this. I can just see those 18-year-olds. Great. The general's sending us a salad. I can't wait. Anyway, the problem is, while hunting and foraging sounds useful in small settings, like a small party, hunters or explorers, 20, 30 men, 15 men, but that doesn't work for 1,000 guys or 2,000. You know, it's just like, okay, go. There's not enough hunting to be had, and truly today, east of the Mississippi, there's probably, well, let's say in the areas, if you take the areas that were, you know, populated in the Revolutionary War and where all these battles happened, there are probably 4 times more trees in that area today than there were in the 18th century. So they're not having battles in the wilderness for the most part. Yes, there were some things in the back country. There's almost like a wilderness war that's going on. But that's not mostly what we're talking about. We're talking about fighting in fairly civilized areas, and there just wasn't a whole lot of foraging to come by, except the foraging of, I just marched by a farmer's field.
Right, or apple orchard.
Right, or an apple orchard, right?
Apples when everyone went by.
Exactly. So Joseph Plum Martin talks about foraging in somebody's turnip field. It's like, well, we're just going to go and fill up our haversacks with turnips because I saw some along the way.
Oh.
Or pumpkins or whatever.
So this question was, did they know how to use chicory as a coffee substitute? And I put in the link to the video where you talk about coffee substitutions. Maybe actually burning or maybe toasting the wheat would maybe be more likely.
Toasting grains, toasting wheat, toasting oats, burning bread. So you like kind of take toast and you overdo it, and then you just put that, and that's your coffee substitute. So there were lots of different sorts of things that they would do in the time period. I think that most of the soldiers would, I mean, even Joseph Plum Martin at times is like, if I just had water, I would be happy. So even that is difficult. We don't think about, you know, so they're not taking water along. I mean, they have to get water. Like, you just walk by a stream, you better fill up your canteen because there's no guarantee of water anywhere.
Okay, I've got a couple super chats here. This one is from Army Man's new video idea, giving a Revolutionary War soldier a Mountain Dew Baja Blast. You could do you know how when you made the carbonated colas, you could do a time travel episode, and I don't know that you could do carbonation.
Well,
Would there be enough?
We talked about barrels, right? They had to make barrels, fermenting barrels strong enough to withstand pressure.
Whoa.
So some of these things are getting pressurized, and they're getting pressurized with carbon dioxide. That's what's happening there.
See, you could do a time travel food. I would personally think that cherry cola is the way to go. But,
and there are some places that have a natural carbonated springs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like I think in some place in New York.
Got to pick just the right place to time travel to. Then.
Somewhere I've got my Patreon names, but I can't find them. Oh, here they are. Every week I try to get the brand new Patreon and YouTube members. So these are new and renewing. Martin Malmquist, Christopher John Martin, Sean Ellis. I like this one. Tricorn on the Cob.
I love that one.
Varduniak Dan, Renee Shepard, Jules Flynn, Finkelstein, Tubby Duck, Cecil Ecker, James Cheese, that's a good one. Joseph Evans, then someone named Stinky, and James Lawson, and then brand new Patreon, Kari Nelson. Thank you for your amazing kindness in giving this kind of support.
Okay, I've got a couple more super chats. Okay,
Yeah.
So this one is from Jaji. Tomorrow, we're visiting Mystic Seaport for a talk on the Susan Constant, a replica of one of the ships of the Virginia Company in the fleet at historic Jamestown.
Very cool.
That sounds wonderful. I hope you have fun.
Yes. I wish I was there.
Right? If only it was a little.
We are headed that direction.
That's true.
Soon. So.
And then this one's from Max Arcole. Awesome topic and really loving my access to food and water at home. Smiley face.
That's one of the things after you get, done studying this, you're like, and then I walked over to the faucet, filled up my thing, and I had a drink of water. And I ate whatever food I wanted as much as I wanted forever until I'm bloated.
Somebody was wondering if maybe in the coastal areas they could have done coastal foraging. Have you ever read across?
There was some references to people getting clams.
See, they were wondering about seaweeds, but it seems like, they would be more likely to do like clams and oysters and, the actual.
You don't eat plants from the sea. Hello. You don't even do that today. Come on. Okay. Let's see here. Now, I thought this was uber fascinating. He did some digging here. And during World War II, the Army combat rations, they were trying to figure out how much food soldiers really needed. And they calculated in World War II that soldiers should have a minimum of 4,000 calories a day, and 4,500 would be better. And so that's what they were shooting for in their rations. They even specifically tried to come up with, it's like, how could we boost those rations? And so they had like chocolate bars just to push it over the line, right? But when they took the 18th century ration and calculated the calories from it, they came up with 2,500 to 2,800, depending on, maybe maxing out at a little over 3,000. So the ration, even if they got their ration, it's not going to meet certainly what the Army thought was appropriate for combat troops in World War II. So that's if they got their ration. And, on that topic, and this one's hard. If we read Joseph Lamartin, he's always talking about starving. He's talking about, we didn't get food for 3 days, 2 days. What we got was rotten, et cetera, et cetera. But there is this one, there isn't, he doesn't have a lot of super detailed references to exactly how much they got, but he does have a couple. And one of them is the 1st Jersey Regiment in the month of December in 1777. And they were issued, they were issued 7,000 pounds of flour and 1,000 pounds of bread. So that's the equivalent of about 8,000 bread rations. But notice the ratio here. It was 7,000 of flour and 1,000 of actual bread. So they're getting a lot more bread than they're getting anything, or a lot more flour than anything else. 7,500 pounds of beef, 236 pounds of pork, and 340 pounds of fish. So they got a lot of beef, a very little bit of pork, and a slightly more fish than pork. So even that's like a 1 day's ration. It's like all these days of beef, 1 day out of the month they got pork, 1 day out of the month they got fish. There were 30 pounds of candles. So candles were part of the per week ration, and generally the candles were meant specifically for men on guard duty. There was also, along with the candle ration, occasionally they mentioned a soap ration. Can you imagine?
It starts making you wonder why they didn't mention it more.
I don't think all those 18-year-olds needed a soap ration anyway. 72 quarts of salt, 276 gills of rice. Again, that's basically one rice ration per day, out of the entire month. At that time, I calculated up that this was probably about 200. they probably needed about 200 rations per day. So there were about 156 rank and file soldiers, and then subalterns and other people. They were generally probably allowed a ration and a half or two rations a day if they were officers, because the officers eat more food, right? Anyway, so that was a 31-day period, and probably about 200 rations. So that would be a need of, if it was very, very specific, a need of about 6,000 rations in that time period. And this calculated out to 8,000 bread rations and 7,500 or almost 8,000 rations of meat. So they got more, at least issued to that regiment, than they really was the minimum required. Now, was it efficiently given out? Did it go bad? Was it bad? Lots and lots of questions here. But at least in this month, this regiment got all the rations that they needed plus some. So that was extremely interesting to me. And I was going to say something else and I forgot what it was. But yep, okay. My mind just emptied. Anyway, that was really, really neat. Let's see. Here's the sickle reference. So I mentioned vinegar earlier. Again, we don't know. There was another reference to a different unit and the amount, and it talked about how many people were sick, and so that can really adjust what the rations were given out. But here we go. I am compelled to add the brave men who are unfortunately subjects of the hospital and are of late obliged to eat salt rations or salt provisions, very unfit for persons in their conditions, and which tend rather to establish than contribute to the removal of their maladies. And further, that in general the troops are not properly supplied with the essential article vinegar, so necessary to the health and comfort, especially when served with salt provisions. This is Major General William Heath writing to General Washington in May of 1783. Now, there was some medical thought in this time period that that scurvy could be prevented with vinegar. And that scurvy was caused by salt provisions. Now, it isn't caused by salt provisions, it's caused by not having vitamin C, but when they would result to salt provisions, other fresh things were coming in. You can get vitamin C from fresh meat, probably gets basically destroyed in the salting process. So they're thinking, boy, they really
when someone's resorting primarily to salt provisions,
right,
they may well be in a situation where they're getting scurvy. So I can see why they draw the connection.
Right. We're running out of time. I could probably do this for 3 hours. There's our sheep thing. We talked about that. Here's turnips. Joseph Plum Martin. One day after roll call, one of my messmates with me sat off upon a little jaunt into the country to get some sauce, i.e. vegetables, of some kind or another. We soon came to a field of English turnips and pulled and cut as many as we wanted.
So in that, where they're calling them English turnips, do you think instead of like rutabagas, that they were what we would call turnips now?
Don't know. I can't answer that one. You ask questions I cannot answer. Here is rations enumerated and valuation of rations dated June of 1781, and they have multiple ones here with adjustments. Number one has the 9 gallons of molasses per 700 rations per week, again for making beer, and 8 pounds of soap. But this one, number 4, was very interesting here. He says, a pound of meat, a pound of bread, a gill of apple or rye whiskey, or a half a gill of rum per day. You don't see a ton of references specifically to whiskey in these writings, but here's one where they specifically speak of rye whiskey or apple whiskey. And again, was it issued in a grog form to keep people from getting too whatever? Don't know. Joseph Plum Martin. Where we procured some carrion beef, for it was not better, we cooked it and ate some, and carried the remainder away with us. We had always in the army to carry our cooking utensils in our hands by turns, and, as we were not overburdened with provisions, our mess had put ours into our kettle. So that's where I was speaking about the carrying the food here. You can imagine too, you're butchering the cows, and you're given like everything. It's like, well, I've got, here's a hoof, here's the head, well, here's the whatever.
Someone's ending up with not the best cuts.
So yes. So the question is, someone's ending up. Now, how do we distribute our rations? Again, it's distributed at the squad level. And what I'm talking about, this distribution method, might be at squad level or it might be at the individual level. But say you get, you're coming up as I'm here for picking up for my 6 men. He's picking up for his 6 men. He's picking up for his 6 men. The butcher is out here and he's got this table. And he's got 6 pounds of meat here and 6 pounds of meat there, and here's a leg, and here's a head, and here's all 4 hooves, and whatever. So the person who's ready to pick up the goods, he turns around, he puts his back to the table, and the butcher says, do you want this pile? Yes, no. Do you want this pile? He points to them, so everybody else can see who's in line. He's seeing what he's pointing to.
Yes.
And the person goes, no, yes. And that's what he gets, right? And so everyone knows it's fair. Everyone knows the butcher isn't going, I hate this guy, I'm going to give him the hooves to eat, So the person gets to pick whatever's, And the same thing can happen at the squad level. So you've cooked your meat, you've basically made your stew, but you take the meat portions out. You divide them up. And you say, okay, Johnny, do you want this one? Do you want this one? Yes. And then he gets that portion of the meat. So if within your squad provision, you might choose the thing. It takes time, but it's the only fair way of doing it.
Right, because no one wanted the hooves. No one.
No. Here is a section where General Washington is expressing his hopes after the inconvenience that have been complained of, and felt that commanding officers of the Corps will never in future suffer their men to have less than 2 days' provisions always upon hand, ready for an emergency. If hard bread cannot be had, flour must be drawn, and the men must bake it into bread or use it otherwise the most agreeable manner they can. So it's like, you might be called to march and be gone for 2 days. Make sure the men have access to 2 days worth of rations on any particular situation. Guys, let's not be caught, without any food ready to go. And here, I imagine you must, by this time, have a considerable parcel of hard-baked bread. So he's talking to a baker. I am moving towards Philadelphia with the army, and should be glad to have it sent forward. You will therefore immediately send all that is ready down to Cornell's Ferry, except about 2,000 weight, which is to be sent in a place called White House, and there wait for the division of the army which is with me. You will continue baking as fast as you can, because 2 other divisions will pass through Pittstown and will want bread. It's like, hurry up, bake faster.
More.
Yes, more.
Okay, so I've got some super chats here.
Yes.
Okay, so this one is from Wisdom Nuggets and Tidbits. Always love your channel and your web store. Lovely things. I have learned much from your channel. Blessings. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I will get to that. Okay. So, this is from Eric F. How were camp followers fed? Were they given rations in exchange for labor they did for the army? And I'm supposed there'd be camp followers, but there's also other people who are working for the army who are like carpenters and, you know, it look kind of like, I'm sure a lot of the camp followers did like laundry and all sorts of kind of side jobs.
So the question was, and he put it right here in the document, were women cooks? Were women cooks? And the documentation is both directions. There are times when we see the women are being, and women would be, camp followers would be issued a portion ration. So maybe 60% of a standard men's ration or something like that. It seems like in certain circumstances, women were much more likely to be laundresses than anything else. Although there were some specific references working with the artificers where there were women that were actually, it's like enumerated, these women were cooks, right? So there are a few circumstances like that. The vast, and the number of women here is very, very small. The number of women with the Continental Army are quite small, on average about 1 woman for every 30 men. So it is not a, you know, there's tons of camp followers kind of a situation. So there you go. That's what I got.
Very good. Okay, so this one is from Solaris the Long Hauler Rail Fan. Wonder what they would have thought about the timeline between your times and what's portrayed in the Star Trek time. So, you know, what would they be thinking about this future tech that's going to come along? And I mean, we're not quite to there is some speculation, but there's more in the 19th century of technology moving along. And I don't know that there's a lot of people speculating in this time period about advances that haven't, like they would be speculating, but it would be things that are actually going to be happening in the 19th century.
Yeah. I don't know that there's not much science fiction or thought processes that are going on. I don't think they've seen enough technological advance to think that
there'll be another leap
far ahead.
But you do start seeing that in the 19th century because of things that are happening here in the 18th century. Because they are.
Yeah. When they see the advance from 1800 to 1850, then in 1870 they can go, imagine what 1900 will be like, right? Versus, you know, the difference between 1700 and 1790. Yeah, there are differences, but it isn't so, you know, crazy that your brain is breaking.
Okay, so this one is from Aaron O'Hara. I have watched this channel for 8 years and am still entertained every week. I just want to say thanks for continuing to make great content.
Thank you, Aaron, very much.
Thank you.
I think I wanted to lead off with this. Obviously, we're getting close to the end, so we'll use it at the end instead. Close to the end, whatever. It would be perfectly unnecessary to attempt a description of the suffering of the soldier about this term of my service. I have marched all night frequently, having nothing to eat, waded creeks, have frequently seen soldiers get up, water in their hats, and drank as they marched. Our provision was the most inferior kind, scarcely enough to sustain life. I frequently have seen poplar bark used for a soldier's tray. So there is someone writing their memoirs about their sufferings as a soldier. That isn't Joseph LaMartin, I don't believe. Go ahead if you've got anything else.
Somebody was just asking about laundry, and so I just dropped into the chat the compilation of the laundry videos that Carol did. So they're excellent. So if anyone hasn't seen them, you definitely should check them out.
Yeah, she goes into great detail about that. There's a concern about waste, making sure. It is once more recommended to the weekly officers and sergeants that they see that their men do not waste their provisions, nor divide them among after they've received them for their messes. The major took notice that some men, when they received their provision, took and cut pieces from their meat and put them on sticks to broil them on the fire. And if they do this, they will certainly not have provision enough, but will always be some that will suffer with hunger. The provision must be kept and cooked together, and the men who are in messes must eat together, and no division to be made except for those on guard. Don't waste your food, because there's hardly any anyway.
Make a stew.
Make a stew. Don't be cooking it just over the fire. Now, there were times when nothing else was available. I love this. General Washington, I think. Yes, or somebody else is writing, but it's like, it is with great grief and astonishment the commander-in-chief is informed that some of the soldiers steal the stores of the army and even the private allowance of their messmates, while others are so vile as to throw away their own provision. This discovers an unjust and ungenerous disposition as well as an inattention to their own comfort and safety. To remedy this, he decrees that, as the army have drawn provisions to a certain period, and he will not suffer the army to return through want of provision until that period is expired, 500 lashes are to be inflicted when any person is detected in the before-mentioned offenses, and in addition hereto to draw only 1 pound of flour and meat per week during the campaign. End of story.
I was really wondering why anyone would throw away their provisions unless they didn't like salt pork. I mean, what would make you do such a thing?
When it was time for the division of feeding and all that, it's time to feed the troops. They had a particular song. Basically, the fifers and the drummers would play a particular song. It's just a food song. So here we go. There was always a great difference manifested in the manner of attending the calls, the music. Fatigue's march and roast beef. The soldiers at Fatigue's call generally turned out slowly and downhearted to muster upon fatigue parade. When an officer would sing out, "Orderly drummer, beat up the roast beef," and the musician fairly commenced it, the soldiers would be seen skipping and jumping and running from their tents to repair to where the rations were to be issued out. It's like, oh, it's fatigue time.
Time to give
food time. I think we've done it. Mm-hmm. It just goes on, guys. I'm not. Look at that. I've just got pages and pages left of stuff. The topic is such a wonderful, intense, and deep, with so much great content and so much to learn and so much to be thankful for in our current lives. Did you have anything you wanted to?
All caught up.
We're all caught up. Super thank you to all you super chatters, for Patreon folks and for members, and the folks that go and buy the wonderful merch that we have on our website. Maybe you need a soldier's horn spoon or a wire fork to eat your ration with, or possibly a soldier's knife. Probably the only knife that any of them ever saw during the entire time that they were soldiers. And some of them, that's the only thing they had to eat with. I mean, they were just like, I don't know. Poor guys. But thank you so much for all your amazing support on your channel, especially sharing our channel with other people on social media, etc. We are thankful for all the amazing support we get. I hope you have, well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ivy, for your help today. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for watching.